Welcome to the third annual Crochet Challenge for Warm Up America, sponsored by Yarnspirations, your online destination for knitting and crochet inspiration. I'm your host, Brittany, and before we get started on this beautiful design, I want to sincerely thank you for participating in this event. Your time is incredibly valuable, and I'm so grateful that you've decided to dedicate some of that time over the next few weeks to help a family in need. We're just about ready to dive into the tutorial, but before we do, I want to remind you that the pattern can be found at BHookedCrochet.com/WUA Challenge 2018. That's BHookedCrochet.com/WUA Challenge 2018. On that page, you'll also find the supplies list, instructions for the challenge, where to send your Afghan, and a link to the challenge Facebook page. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments section on that page or in the Facebook group. All right, let's get started. We're going to start off with those big, beautiful hexagons, and to do so, we need to grab color B and go ahead and create your slip knot. And now we want to chain 4. And we need to turn this chain 4 into a ring. So what we're going to do is focus our attention on the first chain that we made, the one that's right next to the slip knot. Insert your hook into that space, and then pull through and through to slip stitch it together. Now we're left with a little blob of yarn here, and we need to find the center of this blob so that we can make an even circle. So when you pull on it from either side, you get what looks like a pretzel. Now the bottom opening of that pretzel right here, that is the center of the ring. So that's where I want to work all my stitches, and I'm just going to slide my finger into that hole to help me as I work my stitches. So to start round 1, we're going to chain 1 and single crochet 6 times in the center of this ring. Now it's always helpful to kind of work over that tail as you go, so I'm just holding on to it with those 2 fingers there at the back, just laying it along my chain as I work my single crochet stitches around. You'll just rotate it as you go. Now once you have your 6 single crochet, you're going to find the first one. Insert your hook into that stitch and slip stitch the round together. Now this is what your work looks like at the end of round 1. Now we're moving on to round number 2, and we're going to chain 3 to start off this round. We are kind of counting this as a double crochet, but it's actually part of our first popcorn stitch. What we need to do is find the first stitch, or the stitch where our chain 3 is coming from, and we're going to make 4 more double crochets in that stitch. Now once you have your 4 double crochets in your chain 3, that total is 5 stitches. Just pull up on your working loop there to release your hook, but don't allow that to fall through. So just hold it nice and steady with your finger. Then find your chain 3, and specifically your third chain, and insert your hook into that chain. So from front to back, it's coming back out the other side, and then grab that working loop with your hook and tighten it up. Now we're going to pull this loop through this loop here, or through that stitch. Then once you do that, the last thing you need to do to complete your popcorn stitch is to make a chain. That's going to seal off the stitch and set you up to start on the next stitch. Now what we need to do to finish round number 2 is make 1 popcorn stitch for every single crochet. So if you remember back, we made 6 total single crochets, and then we've already made our first popcorn stitch. So what we need to do now is make 1 popcorn stitch for the remaining 5 single crochet. So you'll just locate your next stitch there and work 5 double crochet into that stitch. Now pull up on your working loop and then go back and find your first post. So right here, don't get that confused with your popcorn stitch there. Insert your hook into the first double crochet of that group of 5. Then pick up your loop again and pull the loop through the last stitch. Now don't forget that last step to make a chain 1 to finish off the stitch. Now go ahead and repeat that for the remaining 4 stitches. So this is what your work looks like now after you've finished round number 2, but we can't just end here. We have to join it from the beginning of the round. And the way we do that is we locate our chain 3. So it's really difficult to see. It's kind of tucked up under there. But when you feel around for your crochet hook, you can find that nice, easy opening for your hook to go through. So you'll put your hook into that space and join with a slip stitch. We're moving on now to round number 3, and we're going to chain 3 to start off this round. And just as a little tip, we're going to start off with a chain 3 at the beginning of every popcorn stitch round. Okay, so we are working in the round, which means that we need to increase every row in order for our work to stay flat. If we were to, say, make the same number of popcorn stitches, we would end up with sort of like a tube. It's going to curl up on itself. So we need to increase. And we are increasing in certain increments, and I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go. But just know for round number 3, we're going to increase for every single stitch. So we're going to make 2 popcorn stitches where there is 1 popcorn stitch from the round below. Now, here at the start, we have to do things just slightly different because we want the round to be as clean and neat as possible. So we're going to make our first popcorn stitch in this space of the chain 3. And when we come back around at the end of the round, we're going to make our second popcorn stitch in this space. Now it'll make more sense as we go through, but go ahead and start making your first popcorn stitch around that chain 3. We're going to count that initial chain 3, the one from this round right here. And we are going to count that as one of our double crochets. Then you'll work the stitch the same as from the previous round. Find your third chain, stick your hook through it, pick up your loop, and then pull it through, and chain 1. Now we're going to add our second popcorn stitch to this space when we get back around at the very end of the round. So go ahead and move on to the next 2 popcorn stitches. And if you look in between them, we have our little chain there that we made, that space. That space right there is where we're going to work our 2 popcorn stitches. So just work them one at a time. Make 5 double crochets in that space. And then once you finish that first popcorn stitch, just go ahead and slide it over. Make yourself some room so you can work your second popcorn stitch in the same space. And here's what it looks like when you get done with that. We can still see a little bit of a gap there, and that's totally fine. The main thing is that we have 2 popcorn stitches in between these two. Now what we need to do to finish off the round is find the space in between the next 2 popcorn stitches, that little chain space there, and work 2 popcorn stitches in that space. And that is the repeat for this round. Once you finish your 2 popcorn stitches in this space, then you'll move on, work 2 in between these 2 and these 2 and these 2. And when you get to that point, I'm going to show you what we're going to do at the end of the round because again, it's just slightly different. Now once you've made it to the end of the round, your work looks something like this, but of course we can't finish things off because we have to have 2 popcorn stitches in this space right here. Now take a look at your work and find that little piece of yarn that's basically right in the middle of these 2 petals. That's actually your chain 3 from this popcorn stitch here. And the reason why we're doing things this way is so that we can split the difference between this space. Because there is a join there, these 2 stitches naturally want to be a little bit further from one another. And if we make both popcorn stitches in this space, then we're going to have kind of a disproportionate petal right here to our work. Same thing happens if we put both of the popcorn stitches in this space. It spreads that space out, shifts it over a little bit, and makes it crooked. So what we need to do is do a popcorn stitch in this space, and then our second popcorn stitch is over in that space, and it looks so much better when we do things this way. So I'm going to find that space, work my last popcorn stitch there, and now to finish off the round, we're going to find that same chain 3 from this first petal we made and join with the slip stitch there. Now one thing to take away here is that at the end of this round, we're going to have 12 popcorn stitches. So go ahead and count. Make sure you're on the right track before we move on to the next round. Well, one of the easiest ways to start memorizing this pattern is to understand how we're working our increases. Now, even though we're working with these textured popcorn stitches, the rules of increasing in the round are the exact same. So I want to take a couple minutes to explain that concept to you, so that way, instead of following or memorizing the pattern, you can just go off of what you see off of your visual cues and finish working the pattern that way. Now that you understand how to crochet the popcorn stitch, the next concept you're going to need to learn is how to increase. We are basically crocheting a circle here, but it feels and looks a little bit different because we're using a popcorn stitch, which is a group of stitches that together make up one. I don't want you to overthink it too much because the same principles that apply for increasing in the round for any other crocheted stitch, well, we're using those same exact principles here. Now, I'm not going to take this opportunity to teach you all about how to increase and how to keep your work flat. I actually already do have a resource for that. You can find that at B.Hooked Crochet, and that is my ultimate guide to crocheting in the round. Here, I want to simplify things as much as possible because I know that we're on a time crunch, and sometimes we just need to look at our work and know exactly what we need to do. Well, this pattern sets you up for just that. What we're looking at here is how our popcorn stitch circle is going to start. At this point, we've already crocheted round number 1, which is really hidden right in here. So that's our single crochet round. Then we have this row here, which is row number 2 or round number 2, and then followed by number 3. Then we have number 4, and finally number 5. The most important thing for you to memorize right now is that you're going to increase in the same place every round. Now let's have a look at how it appears in our circle here. So let's look right here. We have 2 petals, we'll call them 2 popcorn stitches. And then if you look at the next row, the next round after that, we see 2 that are right here. Then we go to the next round, we see another 2 followed by another 2. So this is an increase point. Now, because we're ultimately turning this into a hexagon, the goal is to have 6 increase points. And if you look through your motif, or if you look through the motif that we're looking at here, we can see all 6 of those increase points. And then our 6th increase point here is going to be at the join. So the moral of the story here is whenever you find an increase point, which is where you have 2 popcorn stitches in one, that is your visual cue that you need to increase again at that point. So when you come to 2 popcorn stitches that are right there together, you're going to make 2 popcorn stitches in the space between them. Now go ahead and finish rounds 4 and 5. At the end, you should be able to count 4 rounds of popcorn stitches. Once you've finished your 5 rounds of popcorn stitches with color A, we can go ahead and fasten off. So just leave that loop on your hook. Trim yourself a tail that's about 6 to 8 inches. And then grab that tail and pull it through the loop on your hook. Now what we're going to do is work round 6 in color A. We're going to work it in the same popcorn stitch pattern that we're familiar with, but I want to demonstrate how to fasten on. So what I do is create a slip knot with the new color, and I want to work my join here in the same place where I just fastened off. So I'm going to insert my hook in between this space right here towards that side of the chain 3. Place the new loop on my hook, pull it through, and then we can just chain 3. Now we're ready to start on round 6. All we need to do is work our same pattern with popcorn stitches increasing at the point that we're supposed to. So again, following those visual cues where we're going to increase every time we see 2, and in between the other ones, we're just going to work 1 popcorn stitch. And of course, we're treating this beginning as our double space. So there will be 2 popcorn stitches in this space, but we're going to work the first one at the beginning of the round and the last one at the end of the round. And we're just going to do 1 round of popcorn stitches with this color B. So this is what your motif looks like now after the end of round 6. We've completed that. I've joined with the slip stitch here to my first popcorn stitch. And I'm ready to move on now to round number 7. Well, round 7, we're going to transition to a new stitch pattern. We're going to leave the popcorn stitches behind and start working with some puff stitches and double crochet. Now, there are a couple things I want you to keep in mind. At every point where we did an increase, there are 6 of them, right? Well, we're turning this into a hexagon. So each one of those increase points is going to be a point in our hexagon. And therefore, we're going to treat it with sort of like a corner stitch pattern. Well, we're going to start off round 7 that way because remember, this is the point where we have an increase. And when we're starting, we're going to chain 5. Now this chain 5 represents a double crochet and a chain 2. Now for each one of our corners, what we need to do is work 2 double crochets, a chain 2, and 2 double crochets. So we have 1 double crochet with our chain here. We've got the chain 2 already. We're going to go ahead and work 2 double crochets in the space, and then we're going to catch that last double crochet at the end of the round. So go ahead and just work 2 double crochets in the same space that your chain 5 is coming from. And that is going to be part of this corner right here. So we're going to transition now to puff stitches. I'm going to find the space in between the next 2 popcorn stitches. I'm still going to work my puff stitches there, so we're pretty familiar with that already. Well, to work the puff stitch, we're going to yarn over, insert your hook in that space, yarn over, and pull up a loop, but stretch it nice and tight so that it's the same height as your double crochet stitches next to it. And we want to do that a total of 5 times. So that was 1. We're going to wrap, pull up a loop for 2, wrap, pull up a loop 3, wrap, pull up a loop 4, wrap, pull up a loop 5. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through all of the loops on our hook and chain 1 to finish it off. So for round 7, we're going to make a puff stitch in between each of our popcorn stitches until we get to our next increase point or our next corner on our hexagon. So that's a total of 4. We've got the first one. Now we're going to work a puff stitch in the next. And again, just make sure you're pulling that first initial loop up to the same height as the next one. That's one really good tip on how you can keep your puff stitches as neat as you possibly can. Now the last tip I have for you to keep your puff stitches nice and neat is to sort of finger block them when you're done. The puff stitch likes to naturally poke out the most out the back side of the work, but this is the right side and I want it to really pop this way. So I'm just going to take my fingers, grab the top of the stitch and push it out. And you can kind of do this as you go along, or you can do it at the end of the round. Either way works just fine. Well, I've got one side to my hexagon completely finished. So the next space that I have is an increase, so I know that's where I need to work this corner pattern. And if you remember, that's 2 double crochets. So there's 1 and 2, and then chain 2. That's going to maintain the point, and 2 double crochets. And so that's what each one of our corners should look like. Now we're just going to continue on with that repeat. We'll deal with this corner when we come back to the end of the round. But for now, go ahead and work a puff stitch in between each of the next 4 popcorn stitches. Work your corner stitch and just keep going until you get to the end of your round. So this is what your motif looks like now at the end of round number 7. I went ahead and I finished all of my puff stitches, all of my points, and I made it back around here to the beginning. I need to address this last corner before I can move on. So I already have my 2 double crochets here. I have my chain 3 acting as my third. So I just need to make 1 more double crochet into this space. And then I'm just going to join with the slip stitch in this space. So just put your hook in the space just underneath that chain 3. Join with the slip stitch, and then that'll pull the chain in place. It's a little bit easier than working into the chain. And that finishes up round number 7. Now we just have a few more rounds to go to finish off the motif. And I want to explain the stitch pattern a little bit. We're not doing anything very different from rounds 8, 9, and 10, but we are going to increase the number of double crochets and we're going to decrease the number of puff stitches. So to start off each of the next 3 rounds, we're going to chain 5, And then we want to find our chain 2 space, make 2 double crochets into that space. And once again, this is just because we're at the beginning of our round. Then we're going to find the first and the second double crochet and make a double crochet into each one of those. And now the goal here is to go from 4 puff stitches to 3. And the way we're going to do that is find the space in between this double crochet that we just worked into and this puff stitch here. We're going to double crochet in that space. Then we're going to skip to the space in between this puff and work a puff stitch there. And then repeat that 2 more times. So we'll puff stitch in this space and puff stitch in that space. And now we've made it back to our next corner. So I want to make sure I double crochet in between this puff and our first double crochet, just so we're matching the other side. And then I'll double crochet into each of these 2 double crochet stitches. And now I'm at my chain 2 space, so the repeat for the corners for all of these rounds are 2 double crochets, chain 2, and 2 double crochets. Now you're probably starting to get the hang of this stitch pattern. What you're going to do to finish off round 8 is work your repeat a little bit more. So work this repeated section that we covered right here. We're going to work it through there all the way around. When we get back to the end, we're going to double crochet in this space right here. We'll join with the slip stitch to this chain, and that's going to finish round 8. Now all you need to do at this point is finish rounds 8 and then follow through with rounds 9 and 10. We're going to be following the same pattern repeat where we are going to increase the number of double crochets while decreasing the number of puff stitches. You can refer to the written instructions to help you through this, and this is what your work will look like at the end of round number 10. So once you've worked through round 10, your motif now looks something like this. We're ready to fasten off. And then just pull that tail through the loop on your hook. And we're going to make 3 of these. So you can choose whatever order you want to do this in. If you want to go ahead and make the next 2, you can go ahead and do so. I do have one tip for you in terms of the finishing of your block. You can see here that my edges are a little bit wavy, a little wobbly. That's totally normal. That's just what happens when you're crocheting in the round. Things will tend to curl and swirl in ways that you don't necessarily want. So what I recommend doing is wet blocking each of your 3 motifs. Now I do have a very handy tutorial on blocking techniques. It covers steam blocking, wet blocking, finger blocking, basically everything you need to know to block your project. You can find that at BHookedCrochet.com/blockyourproject. Now once you have all 3 of your motifs made. You have all 3 of them blocked. We're ready to join them together and start working on the rest of our Afghan. Remember, if you have any questions whatsoever, I'm here for you, as well as hundreds of other yarn heroes. If you find yourself stuck at any point, leave your question in the comments section at BHookedCrochet.com/WUA Challenge 2018, or seek help from a fellow challenge participant on the Facebook event page. Go ahead and proceed now to video number 2. We'll learn how to join everything together and work up those finishing touches.